ギザロフという名はもう忘れた。今の我は過去などすでに超越した。超越者、それが我が唯一の名。そしてこれは人類の頂点たるす。超越の力には何者も匹敵せん。この地で不甲斐ない世界を変えるのにふさわしい。
人間は命の果てに直面する死を恐れる。だから私はここに来た。彼は死とは地獄から与えられる自分を示す逆流の力、衝域長砲。私はマスターの作った道具だ。死ぬために生きている。
Well, hello everyone. I'm back here. I don't have Frontier with me today again because he's being a good boy and going to church. I'm just a regular blasphemer. But today I have a guest with me, joining us from all the way in Belgium. It's matsmeister.
Hey guys.
So matsmeister, I believe you are part of the strategy squad.
Yeah, I got accepted last week.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I have something to admit. I don't really watch other people's videos that much. So I haven't seen any of your videos before, so I don't actually know what your focus is.
That's okay. I just do my videos for fun and, well, sometimes for the views.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what most of the strategy squad does. So today we're actually going to be talking about Alpha and Transcendent. I guess Alpha, a lot of people have been waiting for her to be added to the game because she was part of the story. Transcendent, well, I guess I want to talk about like my thoughts on the second story until it's over on global. Mats, dude, were you looking forward to Alpha at all?
Yeah, actually I was, because from the first time I saw her in the story, she looked like an interesting character. She didn't actually have a talent, just the Unbreakable Guardian guard effect, but a new Lancer tank who looks very nice with those crystals. Yeah, I just wanted her.
Yeah, I'm sure many people found her, quote, interesting, unquote. I'm sure it's totally for only game mechanic reasons too, but since we're on that, I guess we could just talk about Alpha. So, as people thought she would be, Alpha is indeed a tank, but she's built more like an off-tank. So kind of like Bernhardt or Altmüller, those sorts of characters. So she differentiates herself from the other ones because, for one thing, her guard is an all-guard. She guards both physical and magic, so she's unique amongst off-tank for being able to do that. And she also has a revive in her 3-cost skill as a passive. In terms of what she does as attacks, just like Bernhardt or Betty, she has some single target attacks and then one big AoE basically. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Alpha. The big problem, of course, is that a lot of the off-tanks that people like using will have a faction buff. Bernhardt, of course, has a faction buff. Altmüller has a faction buff. If you consider Juggler an off-tank at this point, he also has a faction buff. Alpha does not have a faction buff, and she trades that for having a little bit more flexibility in her other skills. Like I said, she has an all-guard. Her AoE is actually, really, really strong. It has, a 0.3 times AoE damage multiplier, which isn't that strong all by itself, but it also will do up to plus 100% damage if she has low HP. So I guess the idea is that you're supposed to, tank a few hits with her, and then blast this AoE out and do a lot of damage. And since she doesn't have a faction buff, right, you would probably put her in one of her appropriate faction boxes. She has Empire and Dark faction.
Wait, what? Why not Yellows? She really looks like a Yellows character.
I mean, I don't know what you mean by that because...
Well, she's created by Gizarof, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought that, well, everyone who's created by Gizarof should actually have the Yellows faction.
I mean, they've been kind of random with how they apply that. For example, Omega doesn't have the Yellows faction.
Oh yeah. Whoops.
I guess, I mean, it's been weird, because it used to be that they put, villainous characters did not have the Yellows faction, but then they went back on that because then Epsilon had the Yellows faction. So basically, they just put the Yellows faction on there whenever they feel like it. That's really the rule they go with. So I mean, being that she is Dark and Empire, like I was saying, it's that both these factions have like a lot of the off tanks in them, right? Yeah, like Bernhardt is in Empire and Dark, Ultimiller is in Empire and Dark, and Betty is in Empire and Dark. So these two factions are pretty well represented in terms of off tanks. So I think she's meant to be like sort of an improvement over those off tanks, but without a faction buff. So if you are using Dark or Empire, especially if you really like playing a very Dark or Empire heavy AoE box, a lot of times you might not be able to pick a tank. So if you put Alpha in there, it might be able to round out your box in a way so that you can keep picking your DPS and then pick your tank later. And of course, since Alpha can guard both, you don't need to be as concerned about magic attacks as well. That's the main use I see for her. I guess the only other thing to mention here is her weird shield effect. She has a physical or magic shield. She randomly gets one at the start of a battle, and then she just switches back and forth between them each turn. It's a very strange mechanic. I mean, obviously the idea is that you would just go in on the turn that you think is more advantageous, but that's still kind of weird to me because you have to ban either all physical or all magical DPS away if you want to use it to its maximum potential, which of course is pretty hard to do. And that aside, you know, there's a lot of players who play very aggressively nowadays, so they're not necessarily just going to let you stand around with Alpha until you get the shield you want before you go in. So yeah, I mean, I kind of went off pretty long there. Do you have any thoughts here?
Regarding her factions, those are actually really nice. Because, well, Dark has always been one of my main factions. From the moment I had Bozel, I was like, yeah, Dark is my main faction now, and, well, looks like she can't disappoint. There's just one thing, and that's with her classes. Why does she have an infantry form? Lancer? Okay, I get it, she's a Lancer from the story, well, but why the infantry? Nobody ever thought, hey, Alpha should be a nice infantry, maybe like double Lancer or something.
I'm thinking they probably just didn't want to give her 2 Lancer classes, right? Because then she wouldn't be flexible enough. So I guess the options here would have been to, you know, I guess they could have given her anything. They just decided on infantry because I guess cavalry wouldn't make a lot of sense to them. She never rides a horse in the story, but she does have like that Pegasus in her Echo of Light skin, so I guess it's kind of weird they didn't give her a cav class. I mean, they probably just like threw darts at a board or something to decide what her other class would be. I couldn't tell you, man.
I actually like her Echo of Light skin. It's a nice Pegasus.
I'm sure lots of people will say they quote like unquote it. Well, anyway, I mean, infantry class, it's fine. Like, I don't think that's really a problem. Like, again, I've been comparing her to Bernhardt and Betty a lot. I mean, both those characters are stuck to one class, so
yeah,
you know, I'm glad they didn't shoehorn her into a single class. That actually would be a problem.
I do actually have one problem with her sprite. She looks like SP Freya's form or SP Sherry, like not the typical infantry, more than an SP holy unit.
They probably reused the rig or whatever, like the sprite, like animations and all that. That's what I'm guessing.
Yeah, it could be possible because they really look the same to me.
Yeah, I mean, they do this a lot in video games, right? Like, they reuse, like, rigs or whatever, so they don't have to do as much work. They just redraw. Basically, they just put, like, a skin over an existing model or whatever.
That explains a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a problem. Like, I mean, obviously, some people are going to notice it very quickly, like you did, but you usually don't expect them to create an all-new model all the time for every single piece of new content. And I guess they didn't care enough in this case with Alpha to give her that. Although her Lancer class, I believe her Lancer class is a unique sprite.
Yeah.
Don't think there's another sprite that looks like that one. Anyway, like, as far as Alpha goes, like, do you have anything else you think I might have missed out here?
To me, she just looks like an interesting character who really has a lot of potential in the Empire. Well, I could say meta, but I don't know what's going on in the CN server, so...
Bernhardt isn't seen as often anymore, but he is still seen, and there is a decent number of really strong Empire characters. Of course, we have Lucretia, who is Empire. You see the occasional Leonhard. Helena, of course, is still Empire. Both the tanks, Hilda and Christiane, are Empire. Alta Miller you see sometimes, Empire Ares, Empire. Elwyn isn't as common anymore, but he is also Empire if you really use him. So, there's plenty of Empire characters still. I think she fits into a box where you didn't have that many tanks to begin with, or if you didn't want to pick a tank first, right? Because right now, what a lot of people do is that they don't pick Hilda or Christiane as their tank, and they just keep picking DPS. And of course, if you have a Dark and Empire heavy box, and you have the buffs for her, if you have Bozo in your box, if you have Licorice in your box, and if you even have Bernhard in your box, Alpha can be like a third or fourth pick if you feel like, okay, I'll pick up this off tank for safety. She'll be kind of interesting in that sense, but she's certainly not going to be like a first pick or anything like that.
Okay. Well, I'm not gonna lie to you. I was actually gonna save up for her. Well, first for Epsilon and then for the Transcendent Alpha banner.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I like her so much.
Sure. That's always a legit reason to pull for a character, you just like their design or whatever. And pulling for Epsilon makes sense because a lot of people were saying they were gonna skip Epsilon, and that's I guess one funny thing I didn't bring up yet is that both Transcendent and Alpha use Epsilon in their bonds. So it's like a lot of people didn't want Epsilon, but now it's like, okay, well, if you want Alpha or Transcendent, you should probably go get Epsilon. So have fun with that.
Well, yeah. It's kind of sad. It's also sad that that Alpha is unlocked by Transcendent. That's kind of a bummer for me.
Yeah, it is pretty annoying for people with limited budgets or people who are free to play. And of course, the month before this was Christiane, and I think a lot of people are going to be dumping a lot of their tickets to get Christiane. So, yeah, I mean, Alpha's in that awkward spot where it's. She's good enough to pull if you really want her, but at the same time, she's kind of surrounded with all these banners that are almost basically must pulls for some people who really like playing meta.
It doesn't matter because I really like her.
Yeah, you always pull for your waifu. All right. Anything final you want to add here?
No, I'm fine. I said everything I wanted to say about her.
I guess I'll talk a little bit more about that barrier thing that she has. So, like I said, she shifts between the physical and magical barrier every turn. But she does have the single target skill, Crystal Edge. This allows you to control which barrier you have up. I don't know how useful this is because honestly, she doesn't really have a large movement range, right? So most of the time, if you're going to engage with her, you probably already have the shield that you want. The only use I can see for this is if, for example, I'm moving Alpha as one of the last units of my turn, and I have the physical shield, and I want to keep the physical shields for next turn. So what I do is that okay, my enemy's too scared of attacking me because I have the physical shield and he has all physical DPS. I run Alpha in and attack with the attack that changes her to the magical shield, and then at the start of the next turn, because of her talent, she'll switch over back to the physical shield again. I can see that being something you could do with it, but like I said, her movement range is nothing special. She has infantry range movement, and she really doesn't have anything that boosts her movement.
Can she equip Apex Boots? Because she is both infantry and lancer, two classes where Apex Boots are available.
Yeah, I mean, she does have Apex Boots available, but even with that, she only has 4 move, and you can give her Breeze, I guess, which would make a 6 move sometimes, but that's actually below average by today's standards, because there's all kinds of crazy movement units, right?
Yeah.
And of course the idea was supposed to be that Alpha makes up for this by being very tanky, but I do find the shield to be kind of awkward, and I think she's going to be kind of tricky to use.
She's like a character you can't actually play unless you know her playing style. A lot of people have with certain characters.
Yeah, I don't think she's bad at all or anything like that, but I do think she is going to be one of those characters that only certain people use, because she is one of those weird gimmicky sort of characters, I feel like. You have anything you want to add here?
No, not at all. I think everything has been said.
All right. Well, that's Alpha, everyone. So I guess we can talk about Transcendent. The funny thing is, like Gizarof, you could argue that Gizarof already had an alt because Kruger is sort of a Gizarof alt if you think about the story. So here we got Transcendent, who is, I I guess the ultimate Gizarof is Gizarof who has finally achieved godhood or whatever. If you guys don't mind, I'm not going to call him Transcendent because that's kind of a mouthful. I'm just going to call him Broly, if you don't mind. So Broly here has a stacking int and defense boost that can be stacked up to 3 times anytime he uses a skill. It's a pretty common talent, stat boost, but he has to use skills, which isn't too bad because he does have Strengthen. So if you feel the need to stack his talent before you go in, he does have a skill that he can use on himself. He also has a Laden style talent. He can attack twice. And aside from that, he's basically just a big AoE character, right? He has all kinds of really big AoEs, including some 1C AoEs, actually, which is something that you kind of wish a lot of AoE characters had. Although, obviously, if you bring his 1C AoEs, he can't bring Strengthen. So you do some trade-off here, because even if you don't want him to be self-reliant with Strengthen, it is nice to have just to stack his talent. Okay, so let's just go through his 1Cs and his 2Cs before we go through his 3C, because his 3C is actually very interesting. It's very unique. So first off, he has a bunch of 1C AoE, and these are actually pretty good. You have one that does 0.25 AoE damage, which isn't that strong, but it does pull enemies towards him and reduce their movement. So basically, this is kind of like an AoE chain hook ability.
Or Laden's 3C.
Yeah. Well, okay, so here's the thing. Laden's 3C is different. Laden's is actually a teleport, which is not a displacement effect. So Laden's is actually stronger than a typical displacement effect because it cannot be resisted. This, of course, can be resisted by, like Hilda. It can be resisted by, Landius tank, but usually if you're going to use this, you're not going to use it on Landius, but you can use this to hold them to you and then AoE their team as needed. That's the one big use I see out of this, because this is the weaker AoE in terms of damage out of the 1Cs he has. He does have one other 1C AoE, which is a 0.35 times damage, which is a really nice multiplier for a 1C skill.
Yeah.
This is also a line skill, and I guess the reason it has a stronger AoE multiplier is because the extra effect is kind of like whatever. It's damage dealt minus 10%, which is it's okay, but I think it's mostly just here for a 1C damage skill, basically. So on top of that, of course, he has a bunch of 2C AoEs, which doesn't need to be said. He has Demolish, Holy Missile, Dark Dragon Breath. Okay, these are all pretty filler. I think the one everybody looked at was the Disintegrate skill. This one is a self-target 5 range AoE, 0.45 AoE damage with and then inflicts attack minus 25% and also reduces defenses by either defense or magic defense by 25%, whichever is higher. So yeah, I mean, the debuffs are nice, of course, but that 0.45 multiplier is pretty crazy. I guess one thing I will note is that Broly here does not have any damage boosts in his talent. He doesn't have AoE damage increase. He doesn't have damage dealt increased in any of his skills or his talent or his 3C passives or anything like that. So you probably want to stick to a Miracle Staff or something on him, which you probably would have used anyway. But yeah, before we move on to his 3C, do you have any thoughts?
That Disintegrate skill with the most damage from an AoE, because considering most AoEs have 0.3 multiplier, that's actually insane.
The next strongest one that I can think of off the top of my head is the Aryan Rod Grand Cross skill, which is 0.44. So that is, obviously Aryan Rod is well known for being just one of the craziest AoE damage characters in the game. And of course, Grand Cross has all those other crazy effects on it as well. So, I mean, this is a very strong AoE. And it has nice range, too. That's the thing. It's not even a tiny AoE or anything like that. His striking range will be similar to Bulzer, right? Because, he has 3 move. You can get +2 from Breeze if you enchant him with Breeze. And he has a move against skill in his 3C, but it usually isn't going to help you engage very much. And I'll explain in a second. But yeah, I mean, most of the time he's going to have either 3 or 5 movement and then +5 range from this, which is a decent striking range.
Well, I just think he can actually deal a lot of damage, and even though he doesn't have the extra damage in his talent or anything, he does have extra int, def, and endef, which kind of makes up for it. If I didn't know his skills, or if I didn't know the cost of these skills, I would actually think Disintegrate is his 3C, just because the amount of damage.
I would say that it's damage-wise, it's definitely on the level of a 3C, but these days, like when they when they make 3Cs, they always put some kind of OP passive on top of it. So this would be a 3C for like an old character, I guess is what I would say. You mentioned his intelligence. One thing I will say is like his intelligence is actually not super impressive. For example, Lucretia has like 560 intelligence or something as her base, and so does Light of Genesis. And Broly here, his base intelligence, if you could put him in his holy class, it's basically around 500. And if you put him in his demon class, which I really do not recommend, is 520. So yes, he does get an int boost in his talent, but his base int is notably lower than some of the big mages nowadays. This big multiplier on this AoE, I guess you can argue, just sort of makes up for the fact that he has a lower base int. And, you know, it's not like I'm saying he's going to be weak or anything. He's definitely going to be doing a lot of damage.
Okay, you just kind of confused me. You said holy. Why? Okay, so I'm just going to call him Bufferoff since I've always called him that.
Okay,
like,
sure.
He's one of the main villains. Gizarof is one of the main villains of the game, and now he gets reincarnated, and he just looks so cool. But why make him holy? That's something that doesn't actually work for me, since he's one of the main villains, and actually mage kind of suits him better, I guess. A holy villain, that's weird.
Well, I'll say, like, at least gameplay-wise, like, Holy is an interesting choice because, obviously, it gives him weakness to Judge Talisman, which can be a problem. So as far as, like, story or lore-wise is concerned, I think the reason he's a Holy class is because Gizarof's goal was basically to make himself a god.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, this is basically the end of that. This is Gizarof when he has achieved his goal and he has become a god. And that's why it's Holy class, because, you know, he's like a deity, right? Or at least he thinks he's a deity, so he is a holy class. I mean, he does have the demon class as the other class, which of course is because, like you said, he is a villain, and he achieved his godhood through twisted experimentation or whatever. I think holy and demon make sense.
You know, now I'm actually convinced. Just his, like, okay, you just said that, but his Echo of Light is literally the god of the universe. He carries the universe on his back and on his belt. I mean, yeah. What you just said makes total sense.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess we can talk about the 3C now. So his 3C is called Fate Reversal. So first of all, this gives a passive because, like I said, all the 3Cs that are for new characters now have a passive, and it's a pretty good passive. So first of all, he does not receive melee range penalties. His talent gives him double attack, right? When he's doing a normal attack. So this no melee range penalty is actually very powerful for him. So when he runs out of AoEs, which he might, because if you bring Strength in on him and only a 2C AoE, he's going to run out of AoEs very quickly. But even when he does, he can normal attack for a lot of damage because he does the double attack. Obviously makes him very flexible. When people think of no melee range penalty mages, they probably think of Sage of the Trees, Old Landius. And obviously, Old Landius, you know, a lot of times Old Landius, you know, he can pick and choose. If he's fighting a melee unit, he will attack from range, and if he's fighting another mage, he'll just run up to your face and punch them. So that's, of course, very useful. For Broly here, that's actually even better because he will attack twice. So I would not be surprised if he was able to, like, kill some mages with his double attack, and same with, and you know, some other melee range units who have low magic defense. If you attack from range, I'm pretty sure Broly here can probably just kill them in one hit. You know, it's basically like Layden, right? Like Layden counterattacks twice, and sometimes he could just kill people on the counter if you stack his defenses high enough. With Broly here, of course, you would need to get some pretty high intelligence on him. And of course, if you're equipping a Miracle Staff, that does hurt his single target damage. So I think it's usually going to be used as cleanup more than anything. The other thing is that this gives him a shield when he's at 50% life or lower. So it might seem like a strange kind of shield effect because honestly, his bulk, if you look at it, isn't really that much more impressive than, say, Kruger or something. His HP and defense really isn't that impressive. So he's typically not going to survive a single target hit, I think. I mean, he does have Stone Colossus and Crystal Molders and stuff, so he can survive some weaker single target hits, and of course he can survive some cavalry is trying to attack into him when he has Stone Colossus and stuff. But I think the main purpose of this is not only to punish single target attackers who might not fail to one-shot him, but I think it's also to punish enemy AoEs. So I think this can sort of turn him into an AoE character that punishes enemy AoEs, which is pretty interesting. And of course, being Holy Class, if you can manage to get him to a point where he can survive Ares AoE, he can of course also punish Ares if he tries to carelessly go in and Wind Whisper him. And of course, if Ares' first AoE drops Broly below 50% life, he's just going to get the shield up, and then the second AoE most likely isn't going to kill him. So the way he punishes these plays is that the active portion of his 3C allows him to exchange his HP with an enemy unit. I mean, what is there to say about this? Like, obviously, if somebody AoEs you, Broly drops the low HP, he can exchange HP with that attacker, and then he can AoE, which will probably kill that opponent. Or if somebody tries to single target Broly, he'll exchange HP with that unit, and then be able to either attack him with his double attack or do an AoE. And of course, after he uses the HP exchange, he can act again, which is what I mentioned earlier about him having some extra striking distance with by having an act again skill. But the problem, of course, is that in order to use this, you need to be in range in the first place, which doesn't help, because most of the time when you use skills like this to try to close distance, they would need to be a self-target skill. They would need to be like Chivalry or Cold Blood or that sort of thing. This is not one of those skills. This can only target an enemy, and it is 4 range, which is decent. But you usually wouldn't be using it to close distance because of the effect, right? Like, why would you want to use the close distance? Because if you use the close distance, your opponent is probably still at 100% life, so you're kind of wasting the extra effect on it. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. What do you think of this 3C?
This could be scary because imagine you're in Apex and your opponent does a juggler jump with the 3C, so he hits you, but then you switch your HP with that of juggler and you kill juggler and you have like 20k HP on buffer off.
Okay, so you're not actually going to get juggler's HP. You're going to exchange HP percentages with your opponent.
Oh.
So juggler, so you will like juggler will have 100% life, right? So you're gonna exchange life with him, and Broly's gonna be at 100% life now, and Doggo, the enemy Doggo, is going to be at like 60% life or whatever it is you drop to after you got hit. The one problem I see with that is that even though, yes, you can sort of punish enemy AoEs that do this, but the other thing is that you're also not helping your team while you do this. So, like in the example you gave, if the dog jump damaged your team enough, you're in trouble. Simply killing the dog actually isn't necessarily going to solve your problem, because the rest of your team is still at low HP. So they can still do their follow-up with whatever AoE they have and kill you. I mean, you could use Broly here to just run forward and kill their follow-up AoE. That's one thing you could do. But yeah, I mean, it does have its limitations, even though it does sound very powerful, and it is a pretty strong skill. But I do think it has its limitations in terms of punishing enemy AoEs if you just allow yourself to get hit like that. So another problem this sort of presents is the fact that since Broly's 3C is not an AoE or an attack of any kind, he's limited to just his 2Cs and his 1Cs to be his attacks. And like I said earlier, sometimes you're going to be using that 1C for a strengthened skill, so it actually kind of limits his loadout.
You can only see one enchant.
Yeah, so I'm sure most people will be going with Clock Enchant on this guy, just to clock his AoEs. And of course you can rely on clocks as you usually do, but there's a reason people use units like Kruger or Bozel, or Himiko for that matter. All those characters have either low cooldown AoEs, or they have AoEs that actually lower their own cooldowns, so you don't have to rely on clock as much. Not to say that clock isn't useful. A lot of times people enchant clock on those guys anyway, but a lot of times they also just go breeze, because if I can reset my cooldowns via the skill description anyway, I can just go with breeze and be able to have my striking distance. And that's, of course, not a choice you get on Broly here. He gets to have... you either get to have clock to reset his cooldowns, or you're going to have to choose breeze so that his range isn't going to be a problem. I don't think this is like a huge deal if you are someone who likes rushing. If you like rushing, then you're probably not going to get off more than like 2 or 3 AoEs before you want the game to be done with. So in that case, like, I don't think it matters whether you clock or not. You would just go with Breeze. But if you want Broly to be able to fight in an extended fight like Himiko or Kruger is able to, then he is not as good at being able to do that. I mean, he's supposed to be able to fall back onto his double attack, right? But if you give him like Miracle Staff or whatever, then that's not going to be as strong. And it's unlikely he's going to be one-shotting tanks or anything with that double attack, I think.
Well, this 3C certainly is really weird. His factions? Mythical, Dark, and Yellows.
Right, so like we were talking about earlier, right? Dark and Mythical, that's pretty standard for this Gizarof variants, I guess, at this point. But it's Legend faction, it's like, what? For some reason, Broly gets to have it. Sure, why not? Yeah, I mean, there's no consistency to this at all. They just do whatever.
If I'm not mistaken, he is a Langrisser mobile character, right? Like,
yes.
He's a mobile original?
Yeah.
So, well, there goes my idea of Yellow's Legends being only for Langrisser 4 characters.
They've already given Legend to plenty of original characters as well. Melania and Oliver are mobile characters and they are Legend, but it makes sense for them, right? Yeah, and sometimes they just give Legend to like random characters, like the Wataru collab characters were Legend faction. I don't know if there's actually a reason for that.
Didn't actually understand it.
You can probably think of some kind of justification for it, but when it comes down to it, they just add Legend faction to units whenever they feel like it. Like Kurama. Why is Kurama a Legend character? Who knows? Aside from that, they could have gone with 2 factions if they wanted to, but they decided he gets to have Legend faction. I guess, to be fair, out of all the other factions they could have given him, Legend is probably the one that makes the most sense.
I did actually notice when new characters come, there's always one with 2 factions and one with 3 factions.
That's not always the case, but yeah, they seem to do that a lot. It's kind of annoying when they make characters with only 2 factions. I would be fine with that if they had a track record of making it so that the unit with 2 factions is actually the better character. But a lot of times what they do is that they give 3 factions to the character that's actually better. It just makes it worse for the one character that only has 2 factions.
Yeah.
And for this banner, I don't know if I would say that Broly is the prize pool here. I think both characters are useful. If you got nothing else to say, we can move on to the 3Cs. Alright, so this time they've kind of got rid of all pretenses and they just didn't give us an SSR 3C this time. Well, I guess one of them is kind of a technicality. But anyway, they gave us Freya, Narm, and Parn's 3C. So I guess we can start with Freya's 3C, which, wow, I am really, really shocked about Freya's 3C because this has got to be one of the best 3Cs they've ever given any SR unit. And in fact, I would say it's better than some of the SSR 3Cs. Like, it's pretty crazy. It's nothing like stand out in terms of like changing how Freya functions overall, but it is it's very similar to Christiane's 3C, right? It is a faction buff that also puts up guard at the same time. So all the things I mentioned before last time when I was talking about Christiane, it applies to this skill as well. She can put her guard up and a faction buff at the same time. She'll be ready in one turn. It makes it so that she always has 2 range guard up if you don't get dispelled. And even aside from that, just the fact they gave Freya a 3C faction buff with an extra effect on it, like that really helps her out because there are a couple Origins characters like Toa who needed an extra effect on the faction buff to actually be usable. And Freya is a lot more viable in a Origins box now if you really like playing Origins. The other thing is that the passive makes her immune to heal block, so you don't even have to give her a Blood Pact anymore. You can just stick the Bracer on her, or you can use Veil of Light, you can use Overlord Badge, use whatever it is you feel like using that's not Blood Pact. She'll still be immune to heal block, so that's great. But I'm just really surprised that they gave a 3C that's this powerful to an SR character. I guess Freya does get some favoritism because she is a very popular female character. Always gotta treat the waifus nicely, so I don't know, what do you think?
They kind of give it to an SP character as well, because SP Freya is commonly more used than normal Freya, and I'd say, well, it's just a really amazing 3C.
you're not wrong that this makes your SP class even better as well. But the thing is that because this is a 3C, this is available even if you aren't using SP Freya, which is also a big deal that I guess I was about to bring up, is that this is an all guard, a faction buff, and and a constant 2-range guard for a freebie character. So like if you're newer to the game and you don't have the resources to get an SP hero, yeah, like Freya, great unit to be using. If you don't have a strong tank to start out with, if you didn't pull for Layden when you started the game, if you don't pull for Landius when you started the game, I would definitely choose using Freya over using like Grenier or something, almost certainly. It's a really good 3C. And we're not necessarily going to see a lot more Freyas in PvP, because the problem is, of course, is that right now the tanks that are available in PvP are really ridiculous. But if you are a big Origins fan, and if you're a fan of Freya, I guess, like this is definitely a really nice 3C.
About that, great for beginners.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly tanks in general. Any tank is great for newer players,
mm-hmm.
especially Freya, because the fixed damage can really help you when you're doing like story or time rift in an early game. When you finally get to level 70. To get her 3C as a first 3C, I would actually say you're doing pretty well.
I would say like competing with her as far as freebie tanks go. Obviously you have Grenier, you have Vargas, you have Serena. Vargas, of course, is always great because Vargas is like very, very tanky physically, and he has the revive. And of course, Vargas's 3C is quite good as well. But Freya does have the magic guard. So if a newer player is trying to tackle some challenge fights or some more magic heavy maps, then yeah, definitely have Freya ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I guess we can talk about Narm. I briefly talked about Narm's 3C when I talked with Sui last month. When we talked about it, we actually had a different version of the 3C to talk about. They actually buffed this 3C before it was released. So when they first revealed it, this 3C just said it's an attack skill that deals 1.6 times damage, and it has the Guard Pierce effect. They added a couple things to it to buff it before they released it. So first of all, they added a passive portion to it. It now has a roundabout passive built into it that has no cooldown, which of course is really nice because it used to be that if you wanted Narm to be able to roundabout constantly, you couldn't do that, but you could try to do that you could have 2 turns of roundabout and then one dead turn by bringing aim and roundabout. The 3C just straight up has the roundabout effect every single time you attack, and of course it has the damage dealt as well. And the one thing they added to the attack portion is that they added a flyer effectiveness to it, which it didn't have before, which was pretty stupid that it didn't have that, but they added that. So
isn't that kind of ridiculous since she's an archer and a flyer?
I guess they thought that because it could pierce guard, it didn't need the flyer effectiveness, but people kind of complained because it's like her main purpose is to get you high scores in Huggin' and Muggin'. So people are like, I want to bring her 3C into Huggin' and Muggin' and be able to let her kill flyer still. Whatever the case, like they did buff Narm's 3C before it was released. But the problem, of course, is that it's still not super impressive to me in terms of SP Narm's viability in PvP. At least I don't really see it. Obviously, you can combine this with like Himiko or Juggler or Layden. Try to lower your opponent's movement before piercing guard. But yeah, otherwise, like I don't like this skill very much.
Yeah, it's nice that she can silence active and passive, but that the opponent needs to have 2 or less mobility in order for that to work. That's kind of a set-off, let's say. It's not actually wow.
I actually think the silence part does not require the movement down. It's just the guard pierce that requires the movement down. The description can be kind of confusing sometimes. But I believe that is the case. Like, you don't need to have the Mobi down to do the silence or the active or the passive silence. But the main draw of this skill was the fact that it could pierce guard, right? I kind of feel like she should have just gotten a straight guard pierce skill. I think that would have been better. You have any final thoughts here on this Narm 3C here?
There's only one thing that kind of makes me happy for it, and that is the active and passive silence. Other than that, I don't actually think it's a great 3C.
So coming off of her SP upgrade from last month, I guess my problem with this isn't so much that it's a bad skill or anything, but it's more that this doesn't change all that much about Narm, which I guess you could argue is in the spirit of her SP class. But I was kind of hoping that since they were waiting to release her 3C like this, that they had something a little bit more interesting planned.
That's always like the catch with a new SR, like an old SR unit that becomes an SP. There are people who use them, people who don't, and well, all Zlong can do is make 3C so they kind of get the popularity up.
Well, alternatively, they could, just make a 3C that's actually good. Just for a change of pace, that'd be kind of nice. So, okay, on that note, let's talk about Parn's 3C. Similar to Narm's 3C, it's good for PvE, but I'm very disappointed in this skill for PvP. When you first look at it, it looks really good. And, it's 1.7 times damage, so really strong. If he has a stack of his talent, he will dispel 4 buffs, and if he has 2 stacks of his talent, he will attack first. So, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty strong skill, but the problem, of course, is that Parn's problem in PvP has always been that he cannot obtain his stacks easily, and this does not help him with that at all. It just makes Parn even better in PvE stuff. If you like using Parn in PvE, then he will still be great. He'll be better with this, attacking first and dispelling 4 buffs. That's pretty strong. A 3-turn cooldown, which is really low for a skill that's this strong. Parn is like a main character. Like compared to other SRs, they do seem to have some love for Parn, but they seem to be very specific about giving him skills that make him decent, but not in any way good for PvP. And this seems to continue that trend.
Isn't it also weird that they release his 3C so late?
Right.
Like, Deedlit and Pirates and Ashram already have their 3Cs. And there was Parn just sitting there crying in a corner waiting for his 3C.
I mean, they kind of went the opposite order, right? You would think that Deedlit would need her 3C the least, yet for some reason she was the first one to get a 3C, and then Ashram, who is the person who leads the 3C the second least, I guess, he got the 3C second, so it's just like, what? Pirates.
Yeah.
And Pirates, I mean, I guess you could argue Pirates needed her 3C more than any of them, and Pirates' 3C was fine. But it's more like Pirates' 3C is more like one of those things where it's like, why did she not have this to begin with? And Parn's 3C is like, it does satisfy a lot of things that people wanted out of a 3C for him, right? Like, he didn't have a very strong attack skill. This is very strong, 1.7 times damage. And it gives him a bunch of cool effects on top, too, if you have a bunch of talent stacks. Yeah, so that's why I can't be completely mad about this skill. It's not a bad skill in terms of PvE and his general usability, but yeah, like in PvP, this isn't gonna do it. And all that aside, he still wouldn't work for PvP even if this skill had a bunch of other extra effects on top, because honestly right now, single target units like Parn that do not have a guard pierce or some kind of strange utility just do not have a lot of use in the meta, because there are way too powerful tanks in the meta. And I mean, Parn could conceivably kill Christian if you stack his stats up high enough, but you'll kill one life and then Parn dies, so it's just like, okay, what's the point of that? I mean, as far as these 3Cs go, I mean, as you can see, they did 3 SR characters this time. Like I said, Parn is a borderline. He technically is an SSR. They're just doing a bunch of leftover 3Cs at this point, because the big ones that people are waiting for are, of course, Elwyn and Liana Tiaras. Mm-hmm. So I think we are very, very close to the anniversary here, and I am expecting one of them to get their 3Cs there. And, even though these are not super popular characters, Oliver and Melania might get their 3Cs next patch as well, because they did end the Part 2 story, and it makes sense for them to get their 3Cs now. Yeah. But yeah, I guess we just have to wait until anniversary to see. But this patch really kind of felt like, let's just do the rest of the 3Cs we haven't done yet.
Yeah, well, about Elwyn's 3C, I kind of read somewhere, I read somewhere that there's a rumor about his 3C. Don't think it was official, but
Here's the rule with those kinds of rumors: you don't believe them. That's the rule.
Okay.
I hear rumors all the time, and I know certain rumors are more reliable than other ones. But even the reliable rumors from like people who are like insiders, like sometimes they end up being wrong. Probably because usually when they get the information, it's in development info.
Oh.
And like nothing stops them from changing things right before they release it. Like for example, the Narm 3C. The Narm 3C was like, it was data mined from the game. Like that's as official as you can get. Like it was data mined from the test server. Despite that, and maybe because of that, they buffed it right before it was released officially. So like anytime you hear about rumors, first rule is don't believe them. And the second rule is like, even if it comes from like a pretty reliable person, they can still be wrong because they do change things all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time I get this video out, it's possible we have already heard some info on 3rd anniversary. So we'll see. Like, I mean, I am expecting some pretty big news this month or next month. We'll see. Okay. So anyway, with the 3Cs out of the way, we can talk about these new exclusives they added. So this time they added Sage of the Trees and Vincent as the exclusives. So Old Landius's exclusive, it's pretty good, I will say. Like, it is once again a helm, of course, because they want people to stop using Tenio's headdress. So first of all, this gives his attack range +1. That alone is already just really OP to get like attack range on a helm slot like that. Clearly, they are factoring in the fact that many people use Gift of Eternal Life on the guy, and they want you to keep doing that, so they give you an extra attack range. Sure, why not? But the other effect on this is that after he attacks somebody, he will create a plus sign shaped terrain around that enemy.
Nice.
I have a couple thoughts on this. So first of all, it's nice in terms of when you think about it in terms of controlling just terrain effects. Then yeah, this is really nice. One of the things about Helena, for example, is the fact that she can delete other people's terrain all the time and that sort of thing. But what I don't like about this is that it actually doesn't help with his walling skills that much, if that makes sense. Because when you think about it, typically when you use Old Landius to stop, a quick moving unit from reaching you, like if you want to stop Elwyn from reaching you, if you want to stop Ares from reaching you, you use the wall skill, right? The 2x5 skill.
Yeah.
And that's good because you can target the ground. You can target whatever terrain you want. This, you need a target to actually hit to create a small patch of terrain. I'm not saying that is useless. Like, that can still be useful, especially if your opponent is keeping their long-range strikers in the back. But by the time Old Landius can reach your opponent and engage them with a single target attack, it probably means they can reach you with their single target attackers or some of their other long-range attackers. So I do think in terms of being able to stop long-range strikers, this does have some limitations to it. But even with that, this is a very good exclusive, and I think it is definitely worth using over Tenio's headdress.
Yeah. The tiles, well, I have Sage of the Trees myself, and there's one problem when using him is that I can never get enough tiles. Most of the time when my opponent is coming out of the tiles, I'm like, I didn't clock or anything, so I'm like, well, this is time to die. With those, I feel like you can lock in, let's say, SP Elwyn just by the new tiles. Hit them and then lock them in between those new tiles with dazzling light effect.
Sure, that is an option. The situation you're describing can happen, and I can see some situations where the extra tiles will be useful, but I don't think it's as useful as just bringing the 2x5 skill. I will say that because Old Landius is a faction buffer, there is going to be a lot of situations where you're not going to be able to use that skill. You're only going to be able to bring Indomitable plus his 3C, right? You probably can't bring Light Array a lot of the time, and in those cases, then yeah, it's nice to have this, where you can place down tiles more regularly, because his 3C, of course, is on a very long cooldown, and if you don't clock, you're kind of boned.
I don't actually know what to say on that.
Yeah. Well, I guess if that's the case, we can just talk about Vincent instead. So, Vincent was already one of those characters not a lot of people use, so I kind of thought they would give him a pretty good exclusive, but here we got this exclusive that just says it ups his critical hit rate whenever he moves enough blocks. And then if he gets a critical hit, he will dispel 1 buff from the enemies, and I'm just kind of like,
why?
This sucks. I mean, it's like, it's not...
A weapon.
Well, I mean, they didn't give him a weapon because, like, you can already use, like, Scarlet Reaper and that works just fine. But I mean, like, for the armor slot, this is fine, right? Because typically, leather armor units, like Vincent, they would use Last Rites. But Vincent usually doesn't use Last Rites because...
he needs to die.
He needs to die and he does damage to himself. So, like, a lot of times he doesn't use Last Rites. With that in mind, it makes sense that they gave him a body armor for his exclusive. But it's also like, why did they put critical hit rate on this? Like, Vincent is not a critical hit character.
I did see him crit a lot in some battles, but crit isn't actually his kit.
I'll put it like this. None of his AoEs have increased crit rate. So really, you're just working with his base crit. So he has 179 skill, so that's about 18% crit, right? Let's say you can get like another 25% crit from between his accessory enchant and his mastery stones. Let's say something around that. He's not even reaching 50% crit, right? And this is even worse if you're fighting against a Landius or a Christian. So it's like...
Or Hilda?
Well, Hilda doesn't matter because Hilda doesn't reduce crits in AoE.
Oh.
But Vincent, it's like... I'm not saying like extra crit hit rate is bad for him. Critting is always a nice bonus, but I would take like damage plus 5% over crit plus 15%, I think, on this guy.
Yeah.
They did give him an extra effect for critting, like he can remove 1 buff from critting. You know, stripping buffs is always strong as well, but I don't know. I think this exclusive is pretty lame. I will say this is probably his best armor, if only because he really didn't have that many choices before. But I'm pretty disappointed. I thought they would have given Vincent something better than this.
Yeah, he deserves better.
I mean, as far as damage AoE characters go, I guess this sort of compounds well with characters like Shelfenil, who are also dispel-heavy characters. There's also Erenrod, who is also AoE damage, and she dispels buffs. Leonhard dispels buffs. So with this exclusive, Vincent can join in on that. If they wanted to do that, they should have just made this dispel 1 buff with no prerequisite. I think it should have just done that. Like, if you're buying exclusives... This is not like a terrible armor for Vincent, but it's also like way at the bottom of the list of exclusive you should be grabbing if you're limited on your controllers.
Okay, hear me out on this. This might sound ridiculous, but some of the SR armors are better in the situation than the SSR armors.
There are certain like weird situations with that, but I don't believe any of the leather SR armors actually have any interesting effects on them that would make them worthwhile. There are certain slots where SRs can sometimes be better, but yeah, this is not one of them, unfortunately. So
those are things I think about before, well, I make up my mind how about SR stuff.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this one. Like I said, I don't like it. So yeah, that's it for exclusives. Okay, well, I'm gonna start talking a little bit about some of the content they added. So the thing is that some of the things I'm gonna talk about this time was just stuff they data mined. Not a lot of the stuff is actually not in the game yet, so this is not something I usually do, but I do think some of this stuff is interesting, so I'm gonna bring it up anyway. So just know that some of this stuff is data mined, so they are subject to change. Well, first I'll talk about something that is not data mined. They added Time Rift 20. Which is the 4th Langrisser 5 Time Rift. Most people probably haven't been hearing a lot about this, and that's because Time Rift 20 is totally lame in terms of the rewards. It of course gives tickets and stuff, which is always nice, but the rare quote-unquote drop this time is the Mimer's Hammer, which is like, come on Zlong, really?
Why not the Tenyo? There's nothing that gives a free
Tenyo headdress, sure. Free Tenyo headdress, or a free balance blade, some people still need that. A free Glory of the World. The only use for a Mimir Hammer is for... Well, there's 2 uses for a Mimir Hammer. Yusuke, and being a really annoying asshole in AI Arena.
It just has limited use, and then they give it out for free, and we don't need it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some players out there that have never gotten one, but I think it's a common enough drop that it's kind of lame when we get one for free. So next I have, so this is data mine content, so this is subject to change, but they are going to add another summon in God's Covenant called Freya. Well, actually, I'm calling it Freya, and most people are calling it Freya, and the reason for that is because these summons are actually gods from Norse mythology, right? But so this is technically supposed to be Freya, because the first one was Thor, right? And this one's supposed to be Freya. But the thing is like we have a character named Freya in the game, so to avoid confusion, I'm just gonna call it Freya. And the thing is that even in Chinese, they didn't call it Freya. They didn't use the proper like characters to call it Freya. They just called it something weird. Yeah, so whatever. it's Freya, whatever. We'll see what they do when it comes to global. But anyway, I don't have a lot to say about this. It's just another summon to level. It has a couple unique aspects from Thor. So Thor, of course, was mostly just like physical damage. So this Freya summon, first of all, it will do magic damage. And it increases magic damage taken by the enemy. It has an AoE skill that's just a magic attack. It has a buff for your allies. You can buff your allies with range, skill range +1. And increase damage for every square away from the opponent you are. So it can increase your ally's range, which is kind of interesting. And it finally has a command skill that actually makes you immune to silence, which can be pretty useful. I mean, in certain challenge stages, I can see this being useful. If you don't have like a bunch of holy rings ready for like those annoying debuff stages, then yeah, you can try bringing Freya to it. Although, of course, the problem with these summons is, of course, that they only last on the field like 2 or 3 turns typically, so like it can be hard to rely on the command if you're just relying on it to make you immune to silence. But aside from that, yeah, it's just another summon to level. It's not a lot to say here.
I hate it when they change names, because like King of the Red Moon was called Lord of Crimso.
Well, changing names from what we expect them to be doesn't have to be a problem, because that's just part of localizing a game.
Yeah.
What annoys me is that when they change the name and it sounds worse. Like, for example, like King of the Red Moon. Like, we know what the Red Moon is called. You just call him King of Crimso. That would have been fine. Or King Crimsonia or something. You know why they called him King of the Red Moon? They probably just plugged his Chinese name into like a Google Translate and it spat out King of the Red Moon or something. Like, that's what I'm assuming happened. I mean, maybe that's what happened. Because it is a very literal translation of his Chinese name.
I do actually realize it, because Crimso is a red moon.
Yeah, in the story, the red moon in Langrisser's lore is called Crimso, and the kingdom was called Crimsonia. So, of course, like, I don't mind that they changed Lord to King. That's fine. But, like, call him, like, King of Crimso or King Crimsonia. Like, I think those names would have sounded cooler than King of the Red Moon. Because when you call him King of the Red Moon, it just sounds like you don't know what the Red Moon is called. Like you just forgot or something.
The name thing has happened before with Mu, who was called Jasmine in the story, and I actually like Jasmine more than Mu.
I will say in that case, I think they made the right call. The name Mu is probably a better representation of her place in the lore. Jasmine sounds better as an actual name, but it made more sense to call her Mu.
Yeah.
Alright, we have one last thing to talk about here. Last patch, people data mined certain voice clips from the game, and it actually tells us what the next collab is almost certainly going to be. Now, just because it's mined from the game doesn't mean it's absolutely going to be in the game. People who know how games in development work probably understand that just because it's in the game data doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to use it, but it's pretty much the next best thing we have to getting an official confirmation. And I'm going to go ahead and upload these voice clips into the chat window here. You can listen to them if you want. So I am, of course, going to play these clips in the video when I make it as well.
ギャーギャーギャーギャーやかましいんだよ。発情期ですかこの野郎。
あ、どうも、志村新八です。
私、江戸に来たらマネつかめる聞いて、遠い星からはるばるやってきたよ。
I don't actually know a lot about anime, so I don't actually know the voices.
All right, no problem. So for those of you who recognize the voices, yes, indeed, these are Gintama characters. So these are, I believe it's Gintoki, Shinpachi, Kagura, I believe. I admit that I too am not very familiar with Gintama. I know it's like a comedy show. I'm sure people who like Gintama will be excited to hear this. My only other thought on this is that since I know that this is a comedy series, which kind of makes fun of other anime, as far as I know, they might be able to have some funny character interactions with Almeida, and that's about all I can think of at the moment. Alright, so I guess that's all we have today. Thanks for joining me today, Mats.
No problem at all. I enjoy doing crossovers and collabs and such, so if you ever need someone, call out to me.
Yeah, and next month there's probably going to be some pretty big news because we're getting very near the anniversary, so people can look forward to that. Well, that's it for today. See you guys next time.
Bye.